Hey guys, Abel here, back with another video. Well, first of all, I apologize for the long delays. It may be like this for another week or two, hopefully, not more than that. First of all, just a public service announcement or, well, something like that. I kept mentioning this book that I'm writing for the longest time, and honestly, I really thought, when the first time I mentioned it, I really thought that I would be done long ago by now. But clearly that's not the case. However, now at this point, it's basically ready, 140 pages, a bit longer than I thought it would be. And the thing is that I thought that, okay, cool, only the proofreading is going to be left. So when people asked me about it, I said oh, it's almost ready, it's great. But basically what ended up happening is that basically the proofreading ended up entailing a complete rewriting of a pretty large section of the book. So that's why it took so long. But at least now I'm much more confident that this book is going to be actually really good and something I can be really proud of, and something more importantly that I think is going to actually help a lot of people. So excited about that, and some announcements are coming shortly. Anyways, in today's video, we are not talking about that, but we are talking about arm training, because this past year has been by far the most successful that I've ever been with trying to improve my arms. That was not my main focus, but I did make a commitment to taking my arm training a bit more seriously and not throwing in the towel that, like this shit sucks, like it's never going to happen anyway. So I actually did train it consistently with higher volumes than what I had done for a very long time. And my arms right now are bigger than they've ever had. I'm also pretty heavy, so that is something to factor in. But I was comparatively heavy in the past. And whereas in the past, I would have had 38, 39 centimeter arms flexed, of course, when I was leaner. And then it would go up to 40 centimeters or so when I was bigger. Now it actually is over 41 centimeters, so 16 and a half inches on both arms. So actually, my hope is that this is going to result in actually staying at 40 centimeters, so 16 inches, even when I diet down. And that's a bit of a revolution in my physique development. There are still many people, and a lot of those you follow, Jeffrey Verity Schofield and Natural Hypertrophy and Dave McConey, like these guys will have, 17-inch arms or so. But for me, this is a huge step forward. So I think I will have a good few insights for you, and maybe you can do something similar yourselves. So I'm basically going to jump into it, and I wrote a bit of a cheat sheet for myself. Now, where the hell did I put it? Here it is. So basically the first thing I want to say is talking about the different levels of arm development that we can talk about, and basically what could be required for each. And I'm going to, anyway, you will see what I'm going to do. So the first one is kind of the meanest way of describing someone's physique in terms of how developed their arms are, and that is the spider body. I think that's a very mean thing to say, because in my mind, spider body just means a skinny fat, completely sedentary person with a huge beer belly. So to me, that is spider body. So please don't call people spider body people that are otherwise lifting and taking this stuff seriously. So that will be level number one, I guess. After that is what I would call a legitimately torso-dominant person with otherwise a good physique. Okay, and actually the best example that I have for that is, well, not this person on my t-shirt, but actually Cristiano Ronaldo. He, in my mind, is a very good example. And by the way, we see this with famous actors that get in shape for a movie, and just in general with people who lift and they are in exceptional shapes, but they are just not doing very focused bodybuilding specific training. So Ronaldo, for example, has a great kind of chest, lat area. His lats are actually very freaky, probably his best muscle group, most gifted. Fantastic midsection. His arms are very underwhelming, and his delts are as well, and that's sort of the classic sign of someone not doing a bunch of bodybuilding-esque work in the gym. So that would be kind of that. And of course, we see all kinds of iterations of that. So someone can have an even better developed torso than Ronaldo and better arms as well, but relative to everything else, it's still not that impressive. After this is what I would call actually kind of a gray zone, because a lot of people would still call this a person with underdeveloped arms. But in actuality, I think these are often just people with very proportional, very good physiques, It's just that they are not arm dominant. So their arms are not the first thing that maybe you notice on their physiques. But actually, it's a very good proportionally developed physique. It's just that it's not this Popeye type physique where, okay, like, what are those gigantic hunks of meat that are like hanging there and are walking towards me? Oh, that's a person with huge arms. So that's not what you see on the person. But you couldn't also say with a straight face that like everything is just overpowering the arms. Like he really needs to work on those. And honestly, I think that's more or less where I have been so far. My arms were not big on an absolute scale at all, and earlier on probably I would have said that my arms were my weak point. Honestly, I think my back was my weak point. My arms were actually one of my better body parts aesthetically. Like I think I had good arms, and actually a lot of people had even trouble believing that they're that small, quote unquote, only like 15 inches, like 38-ish centimeters. The fact that on an absolute scale, like the actual measurement might not be that impressive, I mean, it doesn't matter that much. What matters is how it looks. So you can still have like big looking arms because relative to everything else, they are good. And I think that's just useful to keep in mind because a lot of the clients that seek me out will tell me that they think that they need to work on their arms. Oftentimes it's just a matter of like, well, you just need to get bigger all over. You need to pack on a lot of muscle on your frame. And at that point, probably you're not going to think that your arms are lagging behind. You just kind of need to grow. And of course, you could make an argument that, well, but he wants bigger arms, or she, but usually he. So why not just work a lot more on the arms then? Well, you cannot sacrifice that many muscle groups, I believe, when you still need a lot of growing all over your body. So maybe that's just kind of a side note for the beginning and a disclaimer. Specializing on things and fixing weak points, quote unquote, is, I believe, a luxury / curse that the more advanced people should be dealing with for the most part. Either way, the last category that I didn't mention so far is kind of the final stage of all of this, which is the arm dominant lifter. So at this point, it's not just that the person has good arms, great arms, or rather I don't think that these people should be set as the standard that like, okay, if you have that, it means that your arms are not underdeveloped. It's like, no, their arms, I mean, you could say overdeveloped, but let's not put it that way because it's not a negative thing. Those people are arm dominant. So actually their arms are overpowering everything else. Now, if that's the look you want, that's completely fine, but that's the Popeye look. Okay, so that's like a specialized physique, which probably can be achieved by most people. Maybe it just requires kind of allocating your priorities. To some extent, you need genetics for that, of course, but even if you don't have great arm genetics, I mean, you can always focus on everything else much, much less than your arms, and then maybe you can keep them smaller in proportion. So that would be kind of the final stage. Now, I would say, actually, and this is going to be a little bit of a controversial thing, but I think that for most people, simply having a routine that is well-rounded with plenty of compound lifts, pulls, presses, maybe within those you can make sure to select those that are going to be hitting the arms better, but having a lot of those and having a pretty modest amount of direct arm work or targeted arm work, so isolation work, curls, extensions, etc. I think that for most people that is going to be enough to get your physique to basically one step before the final stage. So it's probably not going to be enough to get you to be an arm dominant lifter. So it's not going to turn you into Popeye, but I'm pretty convinced and confident that for most of you, it's going to take you past Cristiano Ronaldo, okay? So you're not going to be a heavily torso dominant lifter. Some of you might be, but I think in a lot of those cases, it's just a matter of your personal preference and how your actual look lines up with that. So I think that if you do a lot of these compound lifts, you're going to have a very good, proportional, well-developed physique with good arms. If you want to be an arm-dominant lifter, then yeah, it's going to take some more work than that. And in some cases, it could also be that, you're sort of falling in between two categories. So it's like your arms could take a bit of extra work, but not that crazy much. So it could be that you're one of those. Like in those cases, you can still make good use of the strategies that I'm going to be mentioning in this video. Now, let's look at some indications that could let you know that you probably still have a good amount of potential to improve your arms, okay? Probably anybody can improve anything still by very, very small margins, but what is a good indication that you can still make a change to your arms that will be like visually apparent to anybody. One such indication would be that your arms are considerably smaller, flexed, than your calves and your neck. So there's this age-old bodybuilding cliche that, calves, neck, and arms, those should be the same size. Now, maybe there are gonna be some small differences, but it's actually very rare that someone's calves are larger than their arms. And when that is the case, it's usually something that can be relatively quickly fixed. I've actually had that at one point, and non-ironically, that was after I had a pretty significant shoulder injury on my left shoulder. So after that, yes, my calves were actually bigger than my arms. Since then, so basically I came back, I could train somewhat normally again, and that very quickly got corrected. And it's never been the case ever since. So if you're someone like that, it's not like the litmus test, so there could be still some unpleasant surprise, but it's unlikely. So that would be like a very clear, good indication there. Another one is some absolute numbers. And in general, we try to stay away from these because inter-individual variability and all of that stuff. But I would say that as a guy, if your arms are less than 15 inches, and like considerably smaller than that, so like, 14 inches, 13 inches, it could be that you're that person for whom that will constitute being at an elite level relative to your genetic potential and still have that size of an arm. It's unlikely, okay? So basically, if you're at that level, you can sort of take comfort in the fact that the odds are in favor of you can still improve your arms quite a bit. And then the last indication would be actually, funnily enough, is that you're actually a torso dominant lifter, and this is like visually apparent for anybody looking in. So I'm not talking about like you wanting bigger arms, so for your standards you're always torso dominant. No, like someone is looking at your physique and like very good physique, like everything looks good, like his arms are kind of like skinny. This is relatively rare with advanced lifters, and in some rare cases, it's not so much a matter of, okay, like this person has small arms. It's just that like his torso is just so ridiculously good. Like Jesus Christ, those lats or that chest or something, or those crazy broad shoulders, like how wide are his clavicles? If that's you, then, maybe that could actually be an exception, but it could also be not. It just means that, dude, you have crazy potential, like pretty much everywhere. So you should focus more on your arms. But the point is, if you actually are objectively torso dominant, there's a good chance that you can still improve your arms a good bit because, obviously this whole like structural balance theory is a myth to an extent, but at the same time, like things do like to develop like roughly in proportion. Like it's with natural lifters, it's relatively rare to see that there is like something glaringly smaller relative to everything else. It's just a rare thing, just the same way as it's relatively rare to see something like glaringly being huge compared to everything else. So let's get into these nice strategies finally that I was talking about. So I changed my mind on a couple of things when it comes to arm training. So I would say that I was a little bit overzealous at one point about the minimalistic arm training philosophy that I had. And by the way, I also need to apologize to a couple of ex-clients where maybe I was a little bit too dismissive of going a bit more hardcore on the arms. I made some mistakes. I'm sorry. Christian, I think. One of them was called Christian. If you're watching this, I'm sorry, dude. But then I'm pretty sure I had a guy called Christian in kindergarten. I think he was kind of a dickhead, actually. We were actually planning on escaping from the kindergarten, and we developed this plan of building these airplanes, and that's how we are going to escape. And he was making fun of me because my airplanes had these like gigantic arms and claws coming out of them. That still hurts to this day, I have to say. Anyways, so the first thing is training volume. So let's start there because obviously that's like a fundamental structural component of everything. With training volume, it's actually pretty simple. If you're someone who has been like me, like pretty minimalistic, so compound lifts, just, a couple of sets of arm isolation work for biceps and triceps respectively, then probably you should be doing more. If currently your arm isolation work for biceps and for triceps is like a third or a quarter of the number of sets that you're doing for everything else or for most other muscle groups that you want to improve to its maximal extent, you should probably be looking to up that gradually as time goes on. And eventually, probably you should be approaching the same volumes that you're doing for other muscle groups. And that has led to success so far. If you're not successful on these other things as well, then kind of we have a bigger problem here. But, generally speaking, if you're like most lifters, you should be doing somewhere in this kind of like 8 to, like low 20s in terms of sets. More realistically, it's more like, 10 to 15 sets. I think for arms, like a good kind of endpoint maybe to arrive to when you're optimized everything, you have good exercise selection, all of those things that we will be talking about, and you went up to this point gradually, but you arrived there, would be something like 4 sets for the biceps and the triceps, like 3 times a week. So maybe that's like 12 sets for each, or maybe 6 sets twice a week for both. So basically like 12-ish sets for both biceps and triceps. That's like 24 sets of arm isolation work, which is actually quite a bit when you're looking at it like that. You should probably not start there. I think if you're currently doing like 3 sets for each, then, up it to 6 right away. Like from 3 to 6, you can just go up. I mean, 6 is still quite low. Then eventually maybe go up to 8 to 9. And by the way, it's not like a mandatory thing that like doing 12 sets or 15 sets or whatever is the goal. This should be, you're doing something and then you're looking at the feedback and rinse, repeat. And if everything looks good, then maybe keep increasing. If you can still like tolerate it, you're still responding well, you can still eke out some progress, even on these like crappy isolation stuff where it's hard to measure progress. It's not impacting everything else to a very significant degree, or maybe actually that's not a factor for you if you really only care about the arms at this point, because everything else is just perfect. But the point is, volume should go up if you've been doing very little volume so far, and it should be done so gradually. If you're someone who has been doing a lot of volume already, so if you're someone who is listening to this and you're like, man, like 12 sets for bicep, like that's it? Is that some kind of a joke? If you're one of those people, then volume was probably not your issue. It may be other things, and you probably need to evaluate those things. So intensity of effort, execution of the movements, or you being like completely unstructured. You're just doing these random exercises all the time. Like you're not even tracking your progress. So yeah, probably then there are some other things to review and do a better job at, and volume is not your issue. Now, since I mentioned volume, what's the deal? So when I talked about volume now, this was only the isolation stuff. So I did not count overlapping volume from compound lifts. But what's the deal with those? Because, I am someone who is pretty happy tracking sort of like fractional volume from those. And actually that was always one of my justification for clients when they complained why we are not doing more arm isolation work. And by the way, I think in many of those cases I was right, because there was just no need to do a bunch more arm isolation work. But, I was someone who traditionally counted sort of fractional volume from these compound lifts. So I would say, for example, so far, and maybe even now, that a set of barbell bench presses, it's not the ideal setup, and biomechanically it's sort of not the ideal movement pattern, but it is hitting the triceps. It's just undeniable. So we should count it, but it should probably not count as much as like some good overhead tricep extension, which is like really full range of motion. So I will count half a set for that. When it comes to something like a dumbbell press, that's even worse for the triceps, because the arms are not fixed. So if the triceps were fully active, you would like throw out the dumbbells to the side. So it should count even less. You know what, maybe I'm either not gonna count that, or it's gonna be like a quarter or a third of the volume that I will be counting. Same thing with pulling movements. So I think that a chin up, a supinated chin up or neutral grip chin up, I would actually be still pretty comfortable counting that as like a 100% legitimate bicep set. But something like wide grip pull down, I mean, that's much worse, because like the biceps are just in a pretty crappy position to actually be recruited optimally, at least. So I will count like half for that. And then something like a row, especially like something like a dumbbell row, I mean, I'm probably going to be counting either nothing or like a quarter of a set for that. Now, some people, like from Eric Helms, I've heard this a number of times, that like, an easy way to think about this is that if with your current volume, you're not happy with your arm development, then probably you want to do more arm volume. But how are you going to do that? Well, it's probably not by doing more compound lifts like presses and pulls. The thing is, I like the idea and I like the general mindset, but the thing with that is you still need to be aware of what you're doing with these compound lifts. Because, okay, you don't need to count the fractional volumes like I did so meticulously and kind of neurotically, but it does matter whether you're doing a dumbbell press or a barbell press. Like, it's going to hit the triceps differently. And for example, if you're completely revamping your program and you're doing a shit ton more volume from barbell presses, whereas so far you did like cable presses, dumbbell presses, and whatever, it's going to change how well your triceps are recovering. So it's fine to not count it, but you do need to account for it in some way, because odds are that as time goes on, there are going to be changes to your program in other places as well, not just the amount of arm isolation work that you're doing. And it's, it's an organism, basically, your whole training program. Like, a lot of things interrelate, and you gotta know how each of these components of the training are changing. So for this reason, I think it is important to account for this. And as good as this argument sounds, I think there's something missing from it, and that is this: you don't need to factor that in and very meticulously count, but maybe just make a note for yourself, like, how many presses am I doing? Out of those, how many are barbell presses? How many pulls am I doing? Am I doing any straight arm, pullover type movement that's going to pretty heavily hit the long head of the triceps? Am I doing supinated or neutral grip chin-ups? Because that's gonna pretty heavily hit the biceps. So you need to be aware, and you need to just document it in some way. Any way is fine. It's just you should be able to look back at your log and see exactly what happened at what point of your training journey. So I mentioned frequency briefly before. When it comes to frequency, I honestly think that this is going to be largely a function of what's most enjoyable and maybe most tolerable for you if you're like me and you don't enjoy training arms particularly. For some people, it might be the most convenient to do 2-3 sets, 5, 6, 7 times a week. For others, it might be, every other day, or maybe alternating. So biceps one day, triceps the other, and just go back and forth, but train every day. Basically, all of these arrangements are perfectly fine. It could be twice a week, 6 sets. I think these are all fine. I don't make too much of the whole, the biceps are a small muscle group, so they recover quickly, so they should be trained frequently. I don't think it matters at all, to be honest. The one exception being maybe that just don't do one time 12 sets of arm work. It just seems very counterintuitive to me that could be optimal to do something so infrequently and expect optimal results. And obviously probably it moves on a spectrum, and maybe there is an ideal sweet spot, but we just see that twice a week frequency is so effective, generally speaking. Plus, again, you have other days of the week where you're training probably and doing other compound lifts that still count. So yeah, I think anything between twice and honestly 7 times a week could be perfectly fine. Now, this is perhaps the biggest, most important section that is coming now, because this one is about exercise selection. And with exercise selection, on the one hand, you could say that it basically doesn't matter at all, because, biceps is elbow flexion, triceps is elbow extension. How complicated are these movements or these movement patterns? Really no need to overcomplicate it. Just pick whatever you enjoy the most. With that point, I might actually agree with that you should just do whatever you enjoy the most, because odds are what you enjoy the most is not going to be something that is pissing your elbows and bicep tendons off like crazy, although people can be very stubborn. But if you do enjoy those movements because they keep your elbows and your bicep tendons happy, then I think there's a very good argument to be made for using those movements. And this is why I think indeed exercise selection can be a very important topic here, is because when you're trying to bring up your arms, I would say that at least 50% of the battle is going to be preserving your tendon and joint health, because these hinge joints are such that they can in an instant go from completely happy, you don't even notice that they are there, to, oh my God, they are so inflamed and they bother me so much that they're basically ruining everything. So because that's the case, it's very, very important to be smart about exercise selection and to never get sloppy with regards to execution. These areas of the body just get pissed off really easily. Honestly, it's easier than, messing up your pecs, messing up your lats, or, these are muscles, but, it's honestly harder to piss off your shoulders even, which are a very complex, it moves in a billion different directions. There are so many ways you can injure them. With the elbows, there are not that many ways to injure them, but it's much, much easier to accomplish it. The good news is that it also pretty easily gets resolved. But while it gets resolved, it can be just very annoying. And then if you don't resolve it fully, but just kinda, then it's one of those things that can be just there in the background, sort of haunting you for a long time. So that's why we're going to be talking about this. And the first thing I want to say here is some of these execution tips that I heard, and that basically ties into like what movements even allow us to have that good execution. So let's start with the biceps. With the biceps, basically, and this is true of both muscle groups, but a really important thing is being aware of the general movement pattern that your joints sort of naturally want to have. Okay, so we have an idea of textbook form, and in the case of, I would say, both the biceps and the triceps, they are actually completely off. We talked about this with basement bodybuilding. Now that I think back, we have these ideas in lifting that like certain things just always need to happen. For example, chest up, like arched back, chest up, like it's just something you always need to do. Well, yes, except when you don't. Like if you want to train your lats, oftentimes like actually you don't want to be arching your back the whole time. Another such thing is tucked elbows, right? Like elbows tucked, like at your sides. Pull the elbows in. That's what strict form looks like. It just looks so neat. Like what are you doing? You're putting them out here. Like, what are you, some moron who is like coming out of the bar? Like, what is this? This is like some octopus from SpongeBob or something. So that is our idea of proper form. So how do you do barbell curls? At your side, curl like this, arms up and down, strictly, very good. Not flared out. Again, you're not a moron. Tricep extensions, same thing. Beautifully, arms tucked, very good. The thing is that this is a perfect way to wreck the hell out of your elbows. And if you want to keep your elbows healthy, maybe it would actually help to just look at what your arms naturally want to do. Because your body is not dumb. Like if your joints want to move naturally in a given direction, odds are that's the direction you should be moving them in. And so the thing with arm training is that what looks pretty on camera is not what keeps them happy. And if you want to keep your elbows happy, and also your bicep tendons probably, they should be moving in an in and out direction. Actually, Joe Bennett, the hypertrophy coach, has some really good instructional videos on this. Like, first of all, just stand up straight and just check how much you can supinate your wrist. I'm a pretty flexible person. I can easily supinate the hell out of it. A bunch of people can't. Like, if they do this, like this is as much as they can get. But even for me, if I'm looking at, like, if I'm just doing a simple elbow flexion movement, like, what direction is my forearm moving in? Because it's definitely not like up and down, back and forth like this. No, my elbows naturally want to move outward, and it's actually like in and out, like it's moving like this, as if I was like flexing to the camera like this. And the more supinated my hand is, and arguably like a supinated position is what's going to hit the biceps more, but basically the more supinated it is, the more so this is the case. If I'm using a neutral grip, I can sort of tuck my elbows in more, and it can sort of just move up and down, back and forth better. But if I'm going to be supinating, it needs to go in and out. So basically, the conclusion for me is that cable curls, like, cable resistance coming from behind me, even dumbbell curls, they're trickier. Like, it should be a diagonal, like flared arms type movement. The fact that your arms are tucked and you're just going strictly back and forth, it might look pretty on camera, but it's not going to look pretty if you look inside your elbow and what's happening there. So I just had a bit of a timeout because I needed to free up space on the recording device. So I was talking about elbow health, bicep tendon health, and kind of what movement patterns and what exercises are conducive to that. Well, mainly just the general movement pattern, but definitely try to get a feel for that. And the way that this kind of in and out movement and not just back and forth movement of the forearm is just so superior in terms of what is making everything like joint-wise, tendon-wise happier here is going to be very apparent. Actually, this is probably the main reason why the easy bar even exists and we don't just use straight bars often, or why someone even thought of not just using a straight bar, is because this is just so much more comfortable. One lesson that is going to come from this once you start playing around with this is that bicep curl movements are not supposed to be pretty. they are just supposed to feel good, and they are supposed to train your biceps effectively. But they are not going to be those movements like we see it with like hack squats and free weight squats and, dumbbell bench presses, where it's just beautiful to look at it. It just flows and everything is just looks so natural and well aligned and everything. No, like good bicep curl movements will always look like these cheaty partial bullshits. Like, who is this guy? Like, it started lifting yesterday? No, it's just in order to execute bicep curls in a way so that it's sustainable for your, connective tissue health, and so that it's actually something you can keep doing and actually accumulate enough volume over time so that you get a training effect. In order for that, they're just not going to be that beautiful. So you're not going to see all the tucked elbows and the whatever beautiful, in theory, textbook form. In practice, not so much. So yeah, like if you look at the bicep curl form of Mike Israetel, Joe Bennett, hypertrophy coach, Eric Helms, myself, it all looks like trash. Like, honestly, maybe Brian Borstein has some bicep curls that I've seen that actually looked nice. Who else? Actually, Joe Bennett, hypertrophy coach, has this like one arm preacher curl, which looks good. But like, that's kind of the thing with preacher curls, that they almost force you into a position where you just cannot make it look that ugly because things are fixed. Speaking of which, I want to talk about some exercises. So I'm going to both mention those that I do like and those that just have no clothes, in my opinion. So we say the emperor has no clothes, like this is bullshit. I feel like it's time for us to admit a couple of things, such as I think the preacher curl has no clothes. I think the incline curl has no clothes. And honestly, I think even exercises that are now commonly like shit on, like barbell curls, dumbbell curls, like how suboptimal they are from like a resistance curve and whatever other perspectives, I think they still have more clothes than the classic preacher curl and the incline curl. And the reason why I'm saying that, so by the way, both of those movements can be done in a way so that they are fine and even legit, but I think that this is one of those things where it kind of just bothers me when someone is getting asked, like, do you think that preacher curls are, like risky exercises? And then this like so predictable answer is given, like, only if you're using too much weight or something like that. Like, I think that you need to be daring enough to make some bold statements if they are appropriate. And I think we just have enough anecdotes at this point. Like, go on YouTube and search for bicep tears. And I mean, they're bad to look at, of course, but you will only see mixed grip deadlifts and preacher curls. Like those are the only two lifts basically where this is ever seen, and some strongman feet as well, like like carrying those stones and whatever, it may happen there as well. But honestly, you don't really see, like, I think I've seen like one barbell curl one where the person was just using some ridiculous form and ego lifting. There are those ridiculous videos where like, haha, let's try to lift like 400 pounds, the two of us. Okay, shocker, you tore your biceps. But otherwise, it's always preacher curls, usually with a barbell, like completely supinated grip. With easy bar, it also happens. There was one that made me really sad because it was a really beautiful looking preacher curl, otherwise with smart setup and everything. The guy was doing it on an incline bench, so not even the preacher curl station, but an incline bench. So actually the ROM was even like purposefully limited a bit at the bottom. And with that, single arm dumbbell version, he still tore his biceps. I mean, that was really upsetting for me because it kind of showed that like nothing is completely safe, which is of course true of any exercise. Now, I'm also not saying that having a lot of videos and having thereby a lot of anecdotes of something is reason enough to like just avoid something and to just definitively say that this is a dangerous exercise, because we also see pec tears sometimes with like a bench press, and I don't think that the bench press is a dangerous exercise that people should avoid. Like honestly, most of those are just really unfortunate freak accidents that sometimes happen. However, like with the preacher curl, I think there's a big difference here, and that is, like, if we were really being honest, for most people, from the first rep that we ever executed on a preacher curl to the last one, it never quite felt right. Like, there was always something awkward about it. Now, of course, like, I know not for everybody, so I'm sure I'm going to get some comments like, I personally love the preacher curl. Okay, great. But this position where your hands are supinated and you're approaching that bottom portion of the lift, like, there is just something in this elbow crease, like, back end of your elbow area that feels awkward as hell. And there was always something that kind of just told me honestly, I don't know, like before I even knew that bicep tears happen, there was just something about it that made me feel uneasy about this. And then eventually maybe I just had some like slight discomfort or something. And I think that's honestly the case for most lifters, and the same thing with incline curls. I actually think that the same thing would go if you did like a behind, so cable resistance, pulling your arms back, so the Bayesian curl, cable curl. If you did that with like an arm blaster, where your shoulders are not allowed to move, I think you would kind of feel something equally awkward. But incline curls, if you're doing it with an actual incline, so you're leaning back, and when your elbows are fully lengthened or straightened out, biceps is fully lengthened, the resistance is pulling your biceps back even more, and you need to resist that. That feels awkward. So it's a really cool word, I think, because it basically is the distinction between it hurts or it's completely fine, like something in between. I'm not saying it hurts. It could be completely okay, but is this completely okay? Something feels off. And that's what I think a lot of you are probably feeling on these movements as well. Now, I think that there is probably something going on, and I'm still trying to discover this. Maybe I should have waited with this video until I actually figure this out. But I think there's something going on with the degree, like shoulder flexion, like a certain extent of that, or like a certain degree of that, in combination with supination of your palm or forearm and a certain degree of that. And the combo of the two is what's creating the problem. Like, we do know something. So we do know, for example, that if you're rotating your hands externally, so basically, thumbs pointing upwards, so neutral grip, the hammer curl grip, in this position, the brachioradialis, so this forearm muscle thingy, is much more active. When it's supinated, you're taking it out of the picture largely. So when you're down here, if your hands were neutral, then the brachioradialis could actually help you to curl the weight back up. Because you're supinating, you're taking most of that out. So all of that is on the biceps. But I would guess that there's something that, like, one of the heads of the biceps in this position, when it's lengthened, is just much weaker. Or it could not even be that. It could just be that, again, in and out. So like, how would your biceps naturally want to move? Like, if I just put my hands forward like this feels good. Hands are neutral, palms facing one another. If I'm supinating like this, well, I guess that's the only way to supinate, right? There's no weight in my hand. This already feels uncomfortable, honestly. Like, I feel things like tensing up here. It's just not a natural position. Now, if I did, well, actually, how can I make this more comfy? I actually can't. The thing is, all I know is, so tucking my elbows like this with palms up feels uncomfortable as hell. My elbow wants to move out, but the problem is that if it moves out, like, my hands would turn inwards. So actually, like, this is like if I could curl like this, if I could do a preacher curl like this, that would be great. So maybe if there were like two like diagonal benches and I could hold like two dumbbells in my hand and do this, I think that would be a very legit option. Like maybe some like cable resistance, like pulling. Maybe I could even like fully lengthen the biceps. But the thing is that such setups, maybe they exist, but they are definitely not common. I've never seen it yet in a gym. So you're putting yourself into a position which is already uncomfortable without weight. And then here, you're loading it up with the heaviest weight, which is going to be the heaviest at the bottom, where everything is just the most vulnerable. Like the forearm cannot help you much. Everything is on the biceps. It's just a bad combination, honestly. And it's not by accident that if you're looking at the people who do this over a long period of time, all of them do it with some pretty significantly modified version. Like Joe Bennett does it with a dumbbell. I think with a dumbbell, like it's probably, like first of all, like you can put yourself into a position where it's going to be comfy. Like if you turn to the side, like now my elbow doesn't really want to go anywhere. Like this feels pretty good. So if you're sitting down with just a dumbbell at the preacher station, turn to the side, put your upper arm here, and you curl like this. This feels good. It feels natural. Like there's not that thing that I had here where like, what the fuck? Like just nothing that my body likes about this setup. This one, this is infinitely better. And then, like you can also like rotate your hand a little bit, like a little bit of a hammer curl position at the very bottom. Is it possible that you're missing out on something because you're not supinated in the bottom position? What I care about is that I'm more likely to miss out on a bicep tear in this case. So I think it's just a good trade-off, and I'm not even sure that you're really missing out on anything there. You see that, or you see some pretty heavily partial range of motion, or at least what looks like partial range of motion. Like if you're looking at natural hypertrophy's preacher curl, he's pretty heavily supinated, but he's going like down here. Like there's still like a pretty healthy bend in his elbows. Personally, I would not be comfortable doing it myself, even with that kind of a setup, but I think it's fine, honestly. Like, and he has been doing it for years, said that it like never caused him any sort of discomfort. I don't think that these guys who end up getting bicep tears will have done it for like 10 years with that setup before. And personally, what I would also recommend is that you set the preacher curl station to a vertical position. Like, don't do it on this 45-degree preacher curl setup because it's more dangerous, honestly. Let's just call it risky, okay? Like, that's a more mild word, maybe less of a trigger word. And by the way, like, so when I say that it's dangerous, like, I don't think it's dangerous like, you know, playing Russian roulette or something like that. I think it's dangerous like, I don't know, going for a swim in the ocean in Sydney. You know, I personally think that that's an insane idea to do. But, you know, millions of people do it, and usually they don't get eaten by sharks. I would never do it because, yeah, like it's unlikely to statistically that like it's going to happen. But it's the most like fear-ridden, horrific way of dying, or one of those that I can imagine. So like, no thanks. Like, and yeah, whatever, I could rant about that. Same thing with the incline curl. So I think it can be a legit exercise, just modify it slightly. So don't put the bench back into like a 45-degree incline, like actually do it pretty upright. And there will actually be still a slight increase in the tension in that bottom position. It's not going to be like literally like, okay, so this is the arm and the resistance is directly pulling the forearm in that direction that, you know, it wants to like hyperextend in basically, and you need to resist all of that with your bicep and bicep tendons. But it's going to be there. And this actually is an important point about the biceps. So especially these days, like the stretch, you know, long muscle lengths, like that's the eighth wonder of the world, or eighth miracle. How do we say that? Yes, the stretch is great. However, the biceps is one of those areas where it's important to recognize the difference between like what you see externally with the involved limbs and segments of the limbs and how they move, distinguishing between that and joint angles and how much of that is required to effectively lengthen a muscle. Because there is a difference, okay? So like in the case, like let's take the pecs. That's an easy example, okay? So what is full range of motion for the pecs? If I'm like just thinking of, okay, like how much am I lengthening the pecs? When is it enough? When is it no longer lengthening more and just other things are happening? So here it's not lengthened at all. I'm bringing it back. I can feel the stretch. Still. I pretty much reached end range. I can bring my arm back more, but this is not lengthening the pecs. This is just doing some weird thing with my shoulder, and I'm pretty flexible, so I can bring it back really, really far. But the fact that I can bring my arms back more, it doesn't mean that the pecs are lengthening more. And the same thing with the biceps. So like, when is it lengthened? Like it's lengthening, maybe still a little bit. It's pretty much here. I can straighten my elbows out more. That did jack shit to my biceps. It just slightly like, you know, extended my elbows more, maybe like went into some slight hyperextension. It's not needed to go there. Like there's no need to add like a margin of safety. Like now it's definitely lengthened. It was plenty lengthened already. So get a feel for this. Like how much do you need to carry this like joint action out to reach the goal that you have? You want to stretch out the biceps. Great. You already did that. The thing is that if you pay attention to this, like you will see that like, there's no need for this. Like there's no need for your shoulders to be this flexed. It doesn't have to be up here. Like, yes, it is very much stretched out this way, but you're risking everything, like your bicep tendon, you're risking like accidentally hyperextending your elbow. If that bench is vertical, if you're paying attention, it still is stretched under load. Like you need to overcome a stretch position in the biceps to start moving that dumbbell. But really, to keep both your bicep tendons and your elbow happy, you want to have this kind of in and out type movement of the forearms. And don't be afraid of using, a rotation of your forearm either. Like, it doesn't have to be like supinated the whole way. It's okay if you're, slightly internally rotating at the bottom and then you kind of supinate back as you come up. It's going to keep your joints, connective tissue healthier, and you will just have an easier time growing those damn biceps. Now with the triceps, very much a similar story. So just pay attention to what feels natural. Like, what is the direction that my shoulder, my elbow, my forearm, where all of that wants to move? Does this feel comfortable? Like tucking your elbows in and doing some overhead extension like that. Is there any moment where you don't think that this feels awkward as hell? No, there isn't. Okay? So elbows flared, that's what it wants to do. This feels natural. This doesn't feel natural. And the same thing applies for push downs as well. This, like tucking your elbows in like this, not cool. Nicely flaring them out, very nice. That's why actually, I think a lot of people are using the double rope attachment, and they don't even know why. They just saw it from somewhere else, but it's actually the reason. Like, you can actually flare your elbows out, and you can have this much more comfortable position for your elbow and like all those tendons that are running across. So it's very important to just be cognizant of like, what is the direction that these joints want to move. And with the triceps, arguably even more, because it's much easier to actually lengthen the triceps than it is the biceps. And with these hinge joints, once again, like, it's easy to go from like completely fine to, oh my God, my elbow is wrecked, but not gonna harp on this forever. For the triceps, I really like an overhead extension, one arm nicely like out to the side. Like, we have a video where we actually talk this over with Kasim. He helped me a lot with this, but basically it's nicely out to the side and just trying to get a feel for like how low can I bring my forearm. I like skull overs. Heard the name from Menno Henselmans. I'm sorry that I'm quoting him again. Arguably skull crushers would be better when you're actually letting it down to your forehead, even though the range of motion is smaller, but you're actually like really lengthening the triceps that way. With the skull over, you're actually like letting it behind your head, and you're removing some tension in the very bottom position. I think with the triceps, it is fine to like really hit it in the most lengthened position. It's just tough on some people's elbows. If you're one of those, then I think this kind of skull over variant could be nicer for you. For a long time, I didn't understand like, why is it that overhead tricep extensions like really wreck my elbows, but skull overs with like much more weight and everything are fine. It's most probably because of this. Over time, I think there is something to be said for like your joints adapting to certain stresses, and what was uncomfortable before is it can be comfortable later. I think that actually happened to me with these overhead tricep extensions. Not promising that this will happen to you as well, but just don't lose hope if you really cannot seem to do certain exercises without discomfort. With the triceps, I think that 2 movements could suffice, honestly. One overhead, like really emphasizing this overhead position. So, shoulder flexion, like some of it is needed to like really lengthen the triceps. And then another like push down type movement. I still like to make it like lengthened, dominant as much as I can. And my favorite for this is either like a double rope attachment kind of push down, or just basically making the rope longer in some way. Because if the rope is just the standard rope length that you have in the gym, then it's going to force you into like this tucked position. Again, elbow rack. If you use 2 ropes, then you can flare it out, and you can also like kind of lean forward, and it's actually going to be much higher resistance in this not top position, but when your elbows are the most flexed. So it's going to make it a bit more like stretch dominant. So I actually really like that, because you can go pretty heavy on that, and you can, if you can go heavier, absolute loads are bigger, then the incremental loads are smaller. And so basically you have a more like a smoother progression journey with it. I think in general for both the biceps and the triceps, like 2 or 3 movements, like 3 movements I think is the most that you would want for both of them. At the moment, like this is how it looks like for me. Biceps, I have this vertical bench, like 1 arm, dumbbell preacher curl, like all the little steps I can take to make it the safest possible I'm taking. So that's one. Second one is like a bilateral Bayesian curl. So basically just standing in front of the stack, elbows nice and flared, and very ugly, but keeps my elbows and bicep tendons happy. So I'm pretty time efficient because it's bilateral. So that's another one. And I'm actually doing like lying on the floor and also cable, like both pulleys held at the same time, and basically like a facing the stack, basically the reverse of the Bayesian curl. So cable resistance is coming from the front, but by lying on the floor, I'm much more stable and like I can really exert myself. I don't need to pay attention to for you know, keeping my torso steady and all of that stuff. For the triceps, I have this push down double rope that I said. I don't at the moment do an overhead one arm tricep extension, even though I have done it for a long time. Now I'm also doing a double rope or some longer rope bilateral overhead rope extension. It's actually really nice. Like the way I do it is I kneel down, or you can also like set up a bench, but it's more complicated. I kneel down, like facing away from the stack, holding the two ropes behind me, curling over with it. And then I can actually like really nicely, comfortably with flared elbows, really hit those triceps. It's really hitting them at the stretch. It feels good. And then I do school overs. And I'm pretty strong at them. Like I just did with 50 kilos, I did 10 reps. So maybe that was a personal record. I'm not completely sure. So basically 3 movements for both bicep and triceps. And I do, 12-ish sets over the course of the week. It actually changes how I set that up. My training is very random. Like I don't really have a split. Actually, it does have a name. It's called the whatever equipment is free in the gym split. I'm going to explain that in another video because I'm actually completely serious. And so, it could be something like 3 sets for each movement, and then you repeat it like slightly more than 1 times, and then you have basically 12 sets. It could be 2 sets. That's more commonly what I do, and then I repeat it twice. So 3 movements, 2 sets each. That's 6 in total, and I do like 2 rounds over the course of the week. And I'm pretty flexible with how I set it up, but like I said, the frequency and the exact arrangement is largely down to you. Okay, guys, to be honest, I want to wrap up this video because PSG Bayern Munich game is starting soon, and I really want to watch it. But I think I said everything that I wanted to say. So if you have questions, if you want me to do a follow-up on this, please let me know. My book is coming very soon. I'm probably gonna announce some pre-sale kind of thing soon, and both the pre-sale and then the eventual sale, it will be very affordable. Like I'm not gonna. I want this to be accessible to as many people, and I want you to be able to kindly support me. It's gonna be something around $10. So it's worth more, but the book industry is cheap, and I think that's kind of good. I see books out there for $30 and whatever. It's fine, but a lot of people will be like, man, I would buy it, but 30, it's just annoying to pay that much for a book when most books are closer to 10. So this is gonna be somewhere around 10, and I hope that a lot of you are gonna read it. And anyways, you will know about it soon. And otherwise, check out the show description if you want to be coached by me, do a consultation, something like that. And hopefully I can finally release this book and I can come back to more frequent videos. So see you guys next time.